Well, there are new details involving the surrender of former President Donald Trump to county officials in Atlanta. We're learning from sources that Trump lawyers are negotiating the terms of his surrender. And early indications from Trump's team is that they're discussing a potential date next week, though no exact date has been set, according to those sources. The former president and 18 co-conspirators have until August 25th, that's next Friday, to turn themselves into authorities. They are all accused of breaking various criminal laws involving alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election in the U.S. state of Georgia. One of the charges attempts to tie them all together. It's usually used to break up criminal gangs. We're joining us now as CNN reporter Zachary Cohen. Good to have you with us, Zachary. So I want to start on when Trump will surrender, likely, because he is facing this racketeering charge, which means prison time is certain if he is convicted. Talk to us about when we can expect him to arrive in Atlanta for fingerprinting and a mugshot.
Yeah, Linda, things are still very fluid, but as you said, there are ongoing negotiations between Trump's lawyers and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office regarding the details of his voluntary surrender. And, we are expecting in this early stages that they are looking at a date early next week, but there is no final decision that's been made as far as when will Trump come to Atlanta and turn himself in. And there's a lot of moving pieces here. As you mentioned, there are 18 other co-defendants that are also trying to work out the details of their potential surrender here in Atlanta. And one of them in particular, Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is actually trying to actively move his case out of the state of Georgia and into federal court. He's arguing that his role as chief of staff, because of that role, he should be able to claim federal immunity defense, which basically means because these allegations are being brought against him while he was serving as chief of staff, that under federal law, he should be able to claim immunity and essentially get his case dismissed there. And, we have heard previously that Trump could potentially try a similar legal tactic. But as of now, we are hearing that ongoing negotiations about turning himself in, the former president, here in Fulton County, potentially as early as next week.
And of course, one of the other co-defendants is the former New York mayor, former Trump attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who claims he's running out of money as he faces these 11 lawsuits. He is now reportedly selling his $6.5 million Manhattan apartment, and the judge wants some sort of evidence to show this financial hardship. Any indication that Trump's going to help him out?
It's a complicated relationship between Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump in these last few months, and especially when it comes to the topic of money. Like you said, Rudy Giuliani is arguing that he is effectively out of money and that he has to sell his apartment or put it on the market in order to pay these mounting legal bills. And Trump has not paid, or Trump's super PACs have not paid directly any of Giuliani's legal bills to date, but they have helped him out with some of the associated costs. They paid over $300,000 to a company that helped archive some of Rudy Giuliani's documents as evidence in an unrelated civil case here in Georgia. But so no direct payments to date between Trump's super PACs and Rudy Giuliani. And Rudy Giuliani is going to have to make the case to this judge that he is running out of money. Now, Rudy's lawyers argue that, look, any sort of detailed description of why he's claiming to be effectively broke would only serve to embarrass the former New York City mayor. But we're going to have to see what happens as far as Rudy Giuliani, his money situation, how that could impact a more perilous scenario that's only, that's coming down the pike, as he is now indicted in this case in Georgia, and we've identified him as one of the unindicted co-conspirators in Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation as well.
Well, very interesting. Zachary Cohen for us. Good to have you on the story. Thank you.